Number 1. Susan Smith. A mother's love. It is supposed to be the purest, most powerful, most protective force on earth, a biological instinct, an unbreakable bond. We believe that a mother would die for her child. But what happens when that bond isn't just broken? What happens when it was never there at all? What happens when the savior is the monster? We are about to explore 10 of the darkest, most disturbing, and psychologically complex case files in modern history. These are the stories of mothers who killed. If you're fascinated by the dark psychology behind the ultimate betrayal, and you believe these stories must be told, subscribe to this channel right now, because this investigation begins with the lie that fooled the entire world. And if you appreciate this kind of in-depth investigative content, let us know by hitting the like button. Our nightmare begins on October 25, 1994. The 911 dispatchers in the small, quiet town of Union, South Carolina, picked up a call. On the other end was hysteria. A young woman, 23-year-old Susan Smith, was screaming, sobbing, and incoherent. She was living every parent's absolute worst nightmare. She told the police a terrifying story. She was stopped at a red light when a black man with a gun jumped into her car. He ordered her to drive, then pushed her out onto the road and drove away. He drove away with her 2 small sons, still strapped in the back. 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex. The town exploded. This wasn't a big city crime. This was Union, a place where everyone knew everyone. The police launched the biggest manhunt in South Carolina history. But this wasn't just a local story. It went national. The world was introduced to Susan Smith. She went on national television, her estranged husband, David, by her side. They wept. They pleaded. They begged the faceless monster to bring our babies home. The entire nation wept with them. How could this happen? This sweet, small-town mother, her life shattered by a random, violent act. The police had only one clue: Susan's description. A black man in his 20s or 30s, wearing a knit cap. The manhunt was intense. Police, helicopters, the FBI, everyone was hunting for this phantom carjacker. Days turned into a week. Day 3, day 5, day 7. Nothing. No car, no suspect, no children. The police were stumped. Sheriff Howard Wells had a serious problem. The story just wasn't adding up. The details kept changing. First, Susan said she was stopped at a red light. Then she told another detective it was a stop sign. The timeline she gave was impossible. A polygraph test, a lie detector, came back inconclusive. The FBI's behavioral unit, the profilers, looked at the tapes of her TV appearances. They saw the tears, but they did not see grief. They saw deception. The investigation began to shift quietly in a new direction. They were no longer hunting a carjacker. They were watching the mother. They dug into Susan's life, and they found the motive. It wasn't a stranger. It was a boyfriend. His name was Tom Findlay. He was the son of the owner of the local factory. He was wealthy, popular, and Susan was obsessed with him. But Tom had just broken up with her. He had written her a letter, a Dear Jane letter, and the police found it. The letter was the key. In it, Tom told her that he liked her, but that he was not ready to be a father. He did not want the responsibility of a ready-made family. Her children were in the way. This is the part of the case that is still debated. A human mind can snap for many reasons, but this one is chilling. Do you believe this was a spontaneous crime of passion driven by that one letter? Or was this a cold, calculated plan that she had been forming for weeks? Let me know your psychological profile in the comments. The police now knew. On day 9, Sheriff Wells brought her in. No lawyers, just Susan and the sheriff who had known her entire life. He confronted her. He told her, "Susan, we know what happened. We know there is no carjacker." He pleaded with her, "Your children deserve to be found. They deserve a proper burial." And after 9 agonizing days of a monstrous national lie, the grieving mother finally crumbled. She confessed everything. She admitted there was no carjacker. There was no black man. There was only her. She told them she had driven her 2 sons to John D. Long Lake. She parked on the boat ramp. She sat there, crying, for several minutes. And then she got out. She released the emergency brake, and she watched. She watched as her Mazda Pertea silently rolled down the ramp. She watched as it entered the dark water. She watched as it sank to the bottom. She listened as her 2 sons, Michael and Alex, drowned, strapped helpless in their car seats. The nation's grief instantly curdled into rage. She was not a victim. She was the monster. And she had not just killed her children, she had lied. She had manipulated the entire country. And, most despicably, she had used a racist stereotype as her shield, terrorizing an entire community just to cover her own tracks. The trial was a formality. Her defense was insanity. They argued she was depressed, suicidal, that she had meant to kill herself too. The prosecution argued it was pure, selfish evil. They showed the jury Tom Findley's letter. She wanted a boyfriend more than she wanted her children. The jury rejected the insanity defense. They found her guilty of murder. They spared her the death penalty, but the judge sentenced her to life in prison. She is still there today, a chilling reminder that the most terrifying monster is often the one we are programmed to trust the most. If this first part of our investigation chilled you to the bone, hit that like button, share it with a friend who loves true crime, and subscribe for part 2 of this Evil Mothers series. Number 2. Diane Downs. A mother. The word implies safety, sacrifice, and unconditional love. We are biologically programmed to believe that a mother will protect her young, no matter the cost. But what happens when that instinct is rotted away by something else, by selfishness, by obsession? We are investigating 10 chilling cases that shatter this fundamental trust. These are the stories of mothers who, instead of protecting, became the predator. If you are fascinated by the complex psychology of these dark crimes, subscribe to our channel because the stories we're uncovering are as tragic as they are terrifying. Our next case takes us to the rural backroads of Oregon in 1983. On the night of May 19th, a car came screaming up to the entrance of hospital. The driver, 27-year-old Diane Downs, was frantic. She was yelling about a carjacker. When paramedics rushed out, they were met with a scene of unimaginable horror. The interior of the car was saturated in blood. In the back, her 3 children, 8-year-old Christy, 7-year-old Cheryl, and 3-year-old Danny, had all been shot at point-blank range. Diane herself had a single superficial bullet wound to her arm. She told police a harrowing story. She said she was driving on a dark, deserted road when a bushy-haired stranger flagged her down, tried to steal her car, and in a fit of random, motiveless violence, shot her and her 3 children before fleeing into the night. It was every parent's worst nightmare, a monster in the dark. But as the medical team fought to save the children, investigators at the scene noticed something wrong. Diane Downs was calm. This was not the behavior of a grieving, traumatized mother. Her heart rate was normal. Her story was flat, rehearsed. As one detective famously said, there was no mother there.
While her children were bleeding out, her main concern seemed to be calling her boyfriend. This was not grief. It was a performance. At the hospital, the toll was catastrophic. 7-year-old Cheryl was dead on arrival. 3-year-old Danny, shot in the back, was alive but would be paralyzed for life. But 8-year-old Christy was alive. Critically wounded, she had suffered a stroke that left her unable to speak, but she was alive. The hunt for the bushy-haired stranger began, but police found nothing. No footprints, no signs of a struggle, no witnesses. And Diane's story kept changing. So investigators did what they had to do. They stopped looking for the stranger, and they started looking at the mother. They dug into her life, and they found the motive. His name was Robert Lou Knickerbocker. He was a married man, and Diane was obsessed with him. She was, in her own words, willing to do anything for him. But Knickerbocker had made one thing crystal clear. He hated kids. He had told Diane repeatedly that he would never be a father to her children. He was the problem. Her children were the obstacle. This motive is almost too monstrous to be real. What do you believe? Was this a premeditated plan to remove the obstacle, or a crime of sudden selfish impulse? Share your psychological profile in the comments. The investigators, now deeply suspicious, tore her life apart. They found the smoking gun. They found her diaries. The diaries were not the writings of a loving mother. They were the obsessive, desperate ramblings of a woman who saw her children as a burden. She wrote, "I'm so tired of them. I'm so tired of them. I want Lou." And then the final piece. Investigators found that Diane had recently purchased a .22 caliber handgun, the exact same weapon used to shoot her children. They had their killer. But they had a problem. The evidence was all circumstantial. The diaries, the gun purchase, the motive. They had no weapon, and they had no witness, except for one, 8-year-old Christy Downs, the girl who saw what happened, the girl who was shot and who survived, but could not speak. For months, prosecutors and doctors worked with Christy. They waited. They hoped. And then a miracle. After months of intensive therapy, the girl who had a stroke began to talk. The trial of Diane Downs began in February 1984. It was a global media circus, and Diane was the star. She reveled in the attention. She did TV interviews during the trial, laughing, flirting, and insisting the bushy-haired stranger was still out there. She was not a grieving mother. She was a celebrity. And then she played her final, desperate, narcissistic card. She walked into the courtroom, pregnant. She had, during the trial, started a relationship and gotten pregnant, believing in her twisted mind that no jury would ever convict a pregnant woman. She was wrong. The prosecution was ready. They put her diary on the record, and then they called their star witness. 8-year-old Christy Downs walked into the courtroom. The room was silent. Diane stared at her. The prosecutor asked the question the entire world wanted the answer to. "Christy, who shot you?" The 8-year-old girl, in a clear, steady voice, lifted her arm, pointed directly at her mother, and said, "She did." It was the kill shot. The performance was over. The jury deliberated for just 1 hour. The verdict: guilty. Guilty of murder. Guilty of 2 counts of attempted murder. At her sentencing, Diane still protested. She yelled, "You are wrong!" The judge was not moved. He sentenced her to life in prison plus 50 years. But the story does not end there. In 1987, Diane Downs, the woman who craved attention, escaped from prison. She scaled a fence and was on the run for 10 days. When she was recaptured, she was sent to a maximum security facility, where she remains today. She is still performing. She still maintains her innocence. She still blames the bushy-haired stranger. She is the nightmare in the mask of a mother. If this case file shocked you, hit the like button, share it, and make sure you subscribe for part 3 of this Evil Mothers series. Hissy.
Number 3. Andrea Yates. We often think of evil as having a specific face, the lying, manipulative face of Susan Smith, the selfish, narcissistic face of Diane Downs. But what happens when the face of evil is just broken? What if the killer is also a victim? We are investigating 10 of the most psychologically complex cases in history. These are the stories that challenge our simple definitions of evil. If you're fascinated by these complex, dark journeys into the human mind, subscribe to our channel. And if you support this investigation, let us know by hitting the like button. Our next story takes us to Clear Lake, Texas. It was the perfect family. Russell "Rusty" Yates, a NASA engineer, and his wife, Andrea, a registered nurse, a devoted stay-at-home mother, and their 5 beautiful, always smiling children, 7-year-old Noah, 5-year-old John, 3-year-old Paul, 2-year-old Luke, and just 6-month-old Mary. They were the all-American dream, but on June 20th, 2001, that dream would be submerged in a hellscape. That morning, Rusty Yates left for work. Andrea was home alone with the children. She was, as always, following the schedule. She fed the children breakfast, and then she methodically began to kill them. She took her 3 youngest sons, Paul, Luke, and John, one by one into the bathroom and drowned them in the bathtub. She killed them and then carried their small, wet bodies to her bedroom and laid them on the bed, covering them with a sheet. Then she drowned 6-month-old Mary. Only 7-year-old Noah was left. He allegedly walked in. He saw what was happening. He asked, "Mommy, what's wrong?" And he ran. Andrea chased him. She dragged him. He fought hard, but he was no match for his 31-year-old mother. She forced him into the tub of water and held him down until he stopped moving. She carried his body and laid it on the bed next to his sister. And then she called 911. She calmly told the dispatcher, "I need a police officer." The dispatcher asked, "What's the problem?" Andrea replied, "I just killed my kids." When police walked into that perfect suburban home, they were met with a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. 5 small, wet, lifeless bodies arranged in a row on a bed. And their mother, Andrea, standing there, calm, wet, waiting. She confessed instantly. This was not a whodunit. We knew who did it. This was a why. Susan Smith killed for a boyfriend. Diane Downs killed for freedom. Why did Andrea Yates kill her children? The answer is insanity. But this was not an insanity that appeared from nowhere. It was nurtured. It was pressured. Andrea Yates was suffering from severe postpartum psychosis. Her husband, Rusty, was a member of a fundamentalist religious group. He followed a quiverful ideology, the belief that you must have as many children as God gives you. Birth control was forbidden. Andrea's body and her mind were breaking. In 1999, after the birth of her 4th son, Luke, she snapped. She tried to commit suicide twice. She was hospitalized. She was diagnosed with psychosis. She was put on heavy antipsychotic medication. And the doctors gave Rusty and Andrea a clear, stark warning: do not have any more children. They were told in no uncertain terms that another pregnancy would trigger another, worse psychotic break, and that the outcome could be catastrophic. Rusty Yates heard this medical advice, and he ignored it. He believed his wife was just depressed. He believed religion would fix her. He got her pregnant again. When their fifth child, Mary, was born in 2000, Andrea's mind shattered. This time, it was worse. Her father died just weeks later. She stopped speaking. She became catatonic. She began to hallucinate. She became convinced that she was evil, that she was a bad mother, that her children were doomed, that Satan was inside her. She became convinced that if she did not kill her children right now, they would grow up to be sinners and would burn in hell forever. In her broken, psychotic mind, killing her children was the only way to save their souls. It was an act of mercy. The trial was a circus. The prosecution argued she knew it was wrong. She called 911. She confessed, "This is evil. Give her the death penalty." The defense argued she was psychotic. She was not in reality. She believed she was saving them. This is insanity. This case is a perfect storm of mental illness and religious extremism. I want to know what you think. Who is the real villain here? Is it Andrea? Or is it the system and the ideology that forced a woman to keep having children she could not handle? Let me know your verdict in the comments. In 2002, the jury sided with the prosecution. They found Andrea Yates guilty of murder. She was sentenced to life in prison. But the story was not over. In 2005, it was revealed that the prosecution's star expert witness had lied on the stand. He had committed perjury. He had invented evidence about a Law & Order TV show episode that did not exist. The conviction was a fraud. It was declared a mistrial. Andrea Yates was granted a new trial. And in 2006, a new jury heard the same evidence, but they reached a very different verdict. This time, the verdict was not guilty by reason of insanity. Andrea Yates was moved from a prison to a maximum security mental hospital. She is still there today. Rusty Yates, the husband who ignored the doctors, divorced her and remarried. This is not a case file about evil. It is an ultimate tragedy, a story of a woman who needed medical help but was given religious pressure and a system that failed to understand psychosis until it was too late. If this case file made you think, hit the like button, share it, and make sure you subscribe for part 4 of this Evil Mothers series.
Number 4. Lacey Spears. She was not just a mother, she was a mommy blogger, a full-time, professional, doting parent whose entire public identity was built around her son. Her name was Lacey Spears, and her 5-year-old son was Garnet. And Garnet was sick. He was always sick. He was a mysterious, baffling medical puzzle who had ear infections, seizures, and severe digestive problems. He couldn't eat. He had to be fed through a feeding tube surgically implanted in his stomach. Lacey was the perfect mother. She was his angel, his warrior. She never left his side, and she documented everything. She posted thousands of updates on Facebook, Twitter, and her personal blog. Pictures of Garnet in the hospital, videos of his brave fight. She blogged about her fear, her exhaustion, and her unbreakable love. The internet loved her. She was a hero, a savior. She received thousands of dollars in donations. She received sympathy and praise from all over the world. But this channel is dedicated to unmasking the heroes, to exposing the monsters who hide in plain sight. If you are fascinated by the dark psychology of deception, subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. The doting mother was a lie. Garnet was not getting sick. He was being poisoned. This is the story of a disease so twisted it defies logic. It is not postpartum depression. It is not psychosis. It is Munchausen by proxy.
a mental illness, or perhaps a mask for evil, where the caregiver secretly makes their own child sick to gain attention and sympathy for themselves. Lacey Spears was addicted to the applause. She was addicted to being the heroic mother, and Garnett was her prop. For 5 years, she had been systematically torturing her own son. The doctors had always been suspicious. Garnett was a medical mystery. His sodium levels were always dangerously high, but only when he was at home with his mother. When he was in the hospital, he would magically get better. Lacey knew they were suspicious, so she moved from Alabama to Florida to New York. Every time a doctor got too close to the truth, she fled. She was running from her own crime. But in January 2014, she went too far. She had taken Garnett to the Nyack Hospital in New York. He was having seizures. The doctors were stumped. They could not find the cause. So, they did one simple thing. They installed a video camera in his hospital room to monitor his seizures. They were not monitoring the child. They were monitoring the mother. And the camera captured the truth. The footage is chilling. It is the stuff of nightmares. It shows Lacey Spears alone with her sick child in the hospital bathroom. She is carrying a feeding tube and a cup. She takes Garnett into the bathroom twice off camera. And just minutes later, Garnett begins to scream. He is in agony. He is writhing. He is convulsing. He was dying. Lacey calmly walked out of the room and called the nurses. The doctors raced to save him. They ran his blood, and they found the impossible. Garnett's sodium, or salt, levels were not just high, they were lethal, catastrophic. They were so high the machines could barely read them. His brain was swelling. His organs were shutting down. He had been poisoned with salt. A massive overdose pumped directly into his stomach through his feeding tube. He died 2 days later. The hero was a murderer. The police raided her home. They found the evidence. They found 2 feeding bags. One was clean. The other, the one that Lacey had just brought from the house, was heavily contaminated with salt. They found her computer. They found her Google searches. Dangers of sodium in children. What is a lethal dose of salt? This case is terrifying. A mother so desperate for online attention that she researched the best way to kill her own son. I want to know what you think. Is Munchausen by proxy true a mental illness like schizophrenia? Or is it just a mask for cold-blooded, calculated evil? Let me know your diagnosis in the comments. The trial was a foregone conclusion. The prosecution played the hospital video. They showed the Google searches. They read her own mommy blog posts where she reveled in the attention. The defense had nothing. They tried to argue that she didn't mean to kill him, that she was just negligent, that she didn't know it would hurt him. The prosecution destroyed them. She Googled dangers of sodium. She knew. This was not negligence. This was murder. The jury agreed. They found her guilty of second-degree murder. At her sentencing, Lacey Spears, the mommy blogger, still performed. She wept. She claimed she was innocent. The judge looked at her in disgust. He called her actions unfathomable. He sentenced her to 20 years to life in prison. She is the ultimate modern monster, a woman who poisoned her child one spoonful at a time, all for the sympathy of strangers on the internet. If this case of digital deception shocked you, hit the like button, share it, and make sure you subscribe for part 5 of this Evil Mothers series.
Number 5. Diane Staudte. We've seen mothers who kill for a man. We've seen mothers who kill from a sickness of the mind. And we've seen mothers who kill for attention. But what happens when the motive is the coldest, most ancient sin of all? What happens when a mother kills for money?
And what if she finds a partner in her own child? This channel is dedicated to exploring the most twisted and complex criminal minds. These are the nightmare cases that defy all easy answers. If you are fascinated by the why, the dark psychology of the ultimate betrayal, then subscribe to this channel and hit the like button to support our investigations. Our next case file takes us to Springfield, Missouri, the Staudte family. On the surface, they were a normal, quiet, deeply religious family. Mark Staudte was the breadwinner, a local musician. Diane Staudte was the doting mother, a stay-at-home mom who played the organ at their local church. They had 4 children, but behind this perfect facade, Diane was harboring a deep, toxic resentment. She hated her life. She hated her husband. She hated her children. She saw them not as a family, but as a burden, a financial and emotional drain that was ruining her life. She dreamed of a new life, a fresh start, and in 2012, she decided to get one. This was not a crime of passion. This was a cold, calculated execution. Her first target was her husband, Mark. On Easter Sunday, 2012, Mark Staudte died in his sleep. The doctors, the coroner, everyone ruled it natural causes. He was unhealthy. He had flu-like symptoms. It was a tragedy. Diane was the grieving widow. The church rallied around her. But Mark was not sick. He was poisoned. Diane had been lacing his Gatorade with Antifreeze, a sweet, odorless, and untraceable poison that slowly, painfully shuts down the human body from the inside out. She had gotten away with the perfect murder. She collected the life insurance policy. She was free. But she still had the burdens. Her children. Her son, Sean, who was 26, was on the autism spectrum. He was difficult. He lived at home. He was annoying. So, just 5 months after she murdered his father, she began to poison him. She put the antifreeze in his soda. He got sick. He had flu-like symptoms. She took him to the hospital. The doctors were stumped. They couldn't figure it out. They sent him home. And Diane just upped the dose. He died a slow, agonizing death on his living room floor. The town was shocked. A double tragedy. The grieving widow had now lost her son. The sympathy was overwhelming. The church prayed for her. Diane had just murdered 2 family members, and no one suspected a thing. She was invincible. She now had 2 burdens left. Her daughters, Sarah, 24, and Rachel, who was 22. Her next target was Sarah. Sarah was the problem child. She had student loan debt. She lived at home. So Diane began to poison her. She put the antifreeze in her Coke. But Sarah didn't die. She just got sicker and sicker. In June 2013, Diane took her to the hospital. She was in critical condition. Her kidneys were shutting down. Her brain was swelling. The doctors were baffled. This was unexplainable. But this is where the plan crumbled. While Sarah was dying in the ICU, a phone call was made to the police. The caller was an anonymous pastor. The pastor told the police, "You need to investigate Diane Staudte. It is not bad luck. It is murder." The police finally looked. They saw the pattern, the father, the son, and now the daughter, all with the same mysterious illness. They pulled the autopsy on Sean. They ran a toxicology screen. And they found it, the antifreeze. This was not a tragedy. This was a serial killer. They arrested Diane Staudte. But the horror was not over. When they interrogated her, she confessed. She admitted to everything: the husband, the son, the daughter. But she let slip one chilling detail. She said, "we." The detectives froze. We? Diane had not acted alone. She had an accomplice. This is the sickest twist in the entire story. I want to know what you think. Who could she possibly have convinced to help her? Who else hated the family that much? Put your guesses in the comments before I reveal the answer. The accomplice was not a boyfriend. It was her other daughter. Her favorite daughter, Rachel. Rachel, the golden child, had known about everything. She had helped her mother poison her father. She had helped her mother poison her brother. And she had helped her mother poison her sister. The motive? The father was a burden. The brother was annoying. The sister had debt. Their final target was the youngest daughter, who was 11. Why? Because she talked too much. This was not insanity. This was house cleaning. The trial was swift. Diane Staudte, the church-going mother, pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. She took a deal to avoid the death penalty. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her daughter, Rachel, the golden child, also pleaded guilty. She testified against her own mother. She was sentenced to life in prison, but with the possibility of parole. She is the ultimate betrayal, a woman who turned her own child into a monster just like her. If this case file of familial corruption shocked you, hit the like button, share it, and make sure you subscribe for part 6 of this Evil Mothers series.
Number 6. Megan Huntsman. We have seen mothers who kill for love and mothers who kill for money. But what happens when the motive is not that complex? What if the motive is just convenience? What happens when a mother sees her own child not as a burden, but just as trash? This channel is dedicated to the darkest, most unthinkable cases in modern history, the crimes that force us to question everything we think we know about human nature. If you are fascinated by these chilling psychological deep dives, subscribe to our channel, because the case you are about to hear will test your limits. Our story takes us to the quiet suburban town of Pleasant Grove, Utah, a deeply religious, family-oriented community. And in this town, one family seemed just normal. Darren West and his estranged wife, Megan Huntsman. They had 3 beautiful older daughters. They were average. But this average family was hiding a secret so monstrous, so prolific, it is almost unbelievable. The story begins on April 12, 2014. Darren West had just been released from federal prison for drug charges. He was moving his stuff out of the family home that he and Megan had once shared. He was in the garage sorting through old boxes, and he found one. A small, white, cardboard box. It was taped shut. It was heavy. He opened it. Inside, he saw what he thought was a doll. It was wrapped in a towel and a plastic bag. He touched it. It was not a doll. It was the body of a dead newborn infant. He immediately called the police. When the officers arrived, they were horrified, but they knew this was just the beginning. They looked around the garage. It was filled with identical boxes. One by one, they opened them. A second box, a second body, a third box, a third body, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. The garage was not a storage unit. It was a tomb. 7 tiny skeletons, 7 newborn babies discarded like garbage in cardboard boxes. The quiet suburban town was now the center of a serial killer investigation. And the only suspect was the mother of the house, the average 40-year-old Megan Huntsman. When police found her, she did not run. She did not lie. She confessed instantly. She admitted that all 7 of those babies were hers. She told them the whole story, a story of a decade-long secret. From 1996 to 2006, every time she got pregnant, she hid it. She told no one. Not her husband, not her family, not her friends. She would give birth alone, in her own bathroom. And the moment the baby was born, she would immediately kill it. Sometimes she strangled them. Sometimes she suffocated them. And then she would wrap the body in a towel, put it in a plastic bag, put it in a cardboard box, and she would store it in her garage. She did this 7 times. The entire time she was raising her 3 living daughters. The horror is unfathomable. A mother living in a house with her living children, knowing that her other dead children were rotting just feet away in the garage. The police were stunned. The world was disgusted. This was not insanity. This was not postpartum psychosis. This was a serial killer. But one of the babies was different. The autopsy revealed that baby number 1 was stillborn, not murdered. So the charges were for 6 murders. The only question was why? Why kill 6 babies and keep 3? Her motive? The answer is so cold, so selfish, it defies belief. She told the police that during that decade she was hopelessly addicted to methamphetamine. She told them she couldn't afford the drugs and the babies. She chose the drugs. And she just didn't want any more kids. This case is just chilling. It raises a horrifying question. We know she was a drug addict, but does addiction explain this? Does it excuse it? Or was this just pure, cold-blooded convenience, using addiction as an excuse? Let me know your verdict in the comments. The trial was swift. There was no trial. Megan Huntsman pleaded guilty to 6 counts of first-degree murder. She knew she could not fight. The bodies were in her garage. At her sentencing in 2015, the average mother was gone. She wept. She said she was sorry. Her estranged husband spoke. He told the court he had no idea. He lived in that house for 10 years and never knew she was even pregnant.
The prosecutor called her the most callous serial killer in Utah history. The judge agreed. He sentenced Megan Huntsman to 6 counts of 5 years to life in prison. 3 of those sentences must be served consecutively. She will never be released. She will die in prison. She is the ultimate suburban nightmare, a mother who chose meth over her babies and turned her own home into a secret graveyard. If this case file horrified you, hit the like button, share it, and make sure you subscribe for part 7 of this Evil Mothers series.
Number 7. Casey Anthony. In the history of American crime, there are monsters and there are mysteries, but rarely does a case capture the entire nation and divide it so completely. This is not just a story of a mother who killed. This is the story of a mother who lied. A mother who, in the face of her child's disappearance, did the unthinkable. She partied. We're investigating 10 of the darkest, most psychologically baffling cases involving mothers. These are the stories that defy all logic. If you are fascinated by the why, the dark psychology of the ultimate betrayal, then subscribe to this channel. And if you believe these cases must be investigated, hit the like button to support our work. Our next case file takes us to Orlando, Florida in the summer of 2008. It is the story of a 22-year-old mother named Casey Anthony and her 2-year-old daughter, Kaylee. Kaylee was a bright, beautiful little girl, and Casey was a party girl, a hot mess, a young woman who, according to her friends, hated being a mother. She saw her daughter as an obstacle, a burden that kept her from the single life she craved. On June 16, 2008, Casey and Kaylee walked out of the family home, and for 31 days, they vanished. For 31 agonizing days, Casey's parents, George and Cindy Anthony, begged her, "Where is Kaylee?" And for 31 days, Casey lied. She told them Kaylee was fine. She was with the nanny. She was at the beach. She was at SeaWorld. She always had an excuse. But Casey was not with her daughter. She was living her best life. The evidence is sickening. In those 31 days, she was partying at nightclubs. She was entering hot body contests. She was shopping. She was getting a tattoo that read Bella Vita, the beautiful life. She was celebrating her new freedom. Finally, on July 15th, her mother, Cindy, forced her to call the police. The 911 call is chilling. Casey is calm. She is not hysterical. She sounds annoyed. She tells the dispatcher her phantom story. "My daughter has been kidnapped by the nanny. Her name is Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez." It was a lie that launched a massive manhunt. The police had to investigate this nanny. They hunted for Zanny the nanny, but Zanny didn't exist. And then they found the car, Casey's white Pontiac Sunfire. It had been abandoned. When the tow truck driver opened the door, he gagged. The stench was overpowering. He told the police it was the smell of a dead body. The investigators tore the car apart. They found a stain in the trunk. They found a single hair, and they found a chemical they had never seen in a murder case before. Chloroform, a chemical used to render someone unconscious. The kidnapping story was dead. This was now a murder investigation. Casey was arrested, but they still didn't have a body. For 5 agonizing months, the search continued. And then, in December 2008, a utility worker stumbled upon a trash bag in a wooded swamp just blocks from the Anthony family home. Inside was the skeleton
of a toddler. It was Kaylee. Her skull was wrapped in duct tape. The monster was not a nanny. The monster was the mother. The trial in 2011 was the trial of the century. It was a media circus. The prosecution had a mountain of circumstantial evidence. They had the lies, they had the partying, they had the Bella Vita tattoo, they had the smell of death in the car, they had the chloroform searches on the family computer, and they had the duct tape. They argued this was first-degree murder, a selfish party mom who murdered her daughter with chloroform and duct tape so she could be free. They asked for the death penalty. And then the defense, led by Jose Baez, spoke, and he told a story so shocking, so bizarre, it changed everything. He admitted Casey had lied, but he said she lied to cover up a tragedy. His story? Kaylee was not murdered. She had drowned accidentally in the family pool, and Casey panicked, and her father, George Anthony, decided to cover it up. He was the one who put the duct tape on the body. He was the one who dumped it in the swamp. And Casey, the victim, had just gone along with the lie. This defense is wild. It blamed the grandfather. It required the jury to believe that a mother whose child accidentally drowned would not call 911, but instead would go partying and get a Bella Vita tattoo? This is the question that haunts this case. Do you possibly believe the accidental drowning story? Or was that the single greatest lie ever told in a courtroom? Let me know your verdict in the comments. The prosecution was stunned. They could not prove how Kaylee died. The body was too decomposed. They could not disprove drowning. The duct tape was not over her mouth. The chloroform search could have been someone else. The mountain of circumstantial evidence was not enough. On July 5th, 2011, the verdict came in. Not guilty. Not guilty of murder. Not guilty of manslaughter. The nation exploded in rage. Casey Anthony, the party mom, the liar, the woman everyone knew was guilty, was walking free. She was convicted only of lying to the police. She was released days later for time served. She is still free today. She is the most hated mom in America. She is the ultimate nightmare, the one that got away, the case where a mother danced while her child was rotting in a swamp and convinced a jury she was the victim. If this case file, the acquittal that still feels like a crime, shocked you, hit the like button, share it, and make sure you subscribe for part 8 of this Evil Mothers series.
Number 8. Alice Perry. We have seen cases of pure, cold-blooded selfishness. But what happens when a mother's crime isn't just about her? What happens when it's about silence? When a mother, so trapped in a world of terror and abuse, makes a choice that is almost impossible to comprehend, to protect the monster instead of the child. This channel is dedicated to exploring the darkest, most complex, and most tragic cases in criminal history. If you are fascinated by the why, the dark psychology that drives these horrific events, then subscribe to our channel, because the case you are about to hear is a chilling story of betrayal. Our story takes us to the Bronx, New York, in 1980. This is the case of Alice Perry, a 19-year-old mother. But this story isn't really about Alice. It's about the monster she enabled. His name was Richard the Mutilator Caputo. He was a sadist, a monster who had already served time for the brutal murder of his own 11-year-old stepsister. And now, he was Alice Perry's new boyfriend.
Alice and her 2-year-old son John were living in his apartment. They were, in effect, trapped in his house of horrors. Caputo was, by all accounts, a violent and terrifying man. He was not a father, he was a tormentor. He hated 2-year-old John. He saw the child as a rival for Alice's attention, and he began to torture him. The abuse was systematic. It was brutal. He would beat the 2-year-old. He would bite him. He would burn him with cigarettes. And Alice, the mother, watched. She allowed it to happen. She was so terrified of Caputo, so broken by her own abusive past, that she chose the monster over her own son. This is the ultimate moral question. When a mother is also a victim of abuse, is she still responsible for the crimes she allows to happen? Where does victimhood end and complicity begin? Let me know your verdict in the comments. The nightmare culminated on March 5, 1980. Caputo was enraged. He flew into a violent fury, and he turned that fury on the 2-year-old child. He beat him. He bit him. He threw him against a wall. He murdered him. But the horror was not over. Caputo, the monster, looked at the mother. He looked at the dead child, and he ordered Alice to help him get rid of the evidence. Alice, the mother, obeyed. They took the tiny battered body of 2-year-old John, they put it in a suitcase, and they drove to a wooded, desolate lot in Staten Island. They dumped the suitcase, and they left. For 1 week, they lived with their secret. But the guilt was eating at Alice. She finally confessed to her own mother, and her mother called the police. When the police found the suitcase, they were horrified. The child was so mutilated, he was unrecognizable. Caputo was arrested. He was charged with second-degree murder, and Alice Perry, the mother, was also arrested. She was charged with manslaughter. This was not a simple case. The trial was devastating. The prosecution argued that Alice was an accomplice, that she had a duty to act, that she chose not to save her son. Her defense? Battered woman syndrome. Her lawyers argued that she was not an accomplice. She was a hostage, a psychological prisoner. She was so terrified of Caputo, so convinced he would kill her too, that she was paralyzed. She was incapable of stopping him. The jury was faced with an impossible choice. Is she a monster, or is she a victim? The jury chose victim. In a stunning verdict, they found Alice Perry not guilty. She was acquitted. She walked free. But the monster, Caputo, did not. He was convicted of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 8 to 25 years in prison. Alice Perry is a ghost in the true crime world. She is a footnote in a monster's story. She is the mother who let it happen. The woman who watched her child be tortured and murdered. The law says she is innocent, but the moral court of history has never stopped judging her. She is a haunting reminder that evil thrives in silence, and that sometimes the greatest crime is doing nothing. If this case file of toxic complicity haunted you, hit the like button, share it, and make sure you subscribe for part 9 of this Evil Mothers series.
Number 9. Marybeth Tenning. There is a mathematical limit to bad luck. There is a point where tragedy stops being a misfortune and starts becoming a statistical impossibility. Yet, for 14 agonizing years, one woman in Schenectady, New York, lived right on that edge, turning her home into a funeral parlor while the world watched and wept for her, not because of her. This is the story of Marybeth Tenning, a woman who committed a slow-motion massacre in plain sight, hiding her monstrous nature behind the veil of a grieving mother. We are investigating 10 of the most psychologically complex cases in history, stories that challenge our simple definitions of evil. If you are fascinated by these complex, dark journeys into the human mind, subscribe to our channel right now. And if you support this investigation into the darkest corners of criminal history, let us know by hitting the like button. Our story begins in the early 1970s. Marybeth and her husband, Joe Tenning, were an average couple living a quiet life in upstate New York. But starting in 1972, a darkness descended upon their home that defies comprehension. It began with their third child, Jennifer. She was born with meningitis and died at just 8 days old. It was a tragedy, heartbreaking but medically explainable. But then, just days later, their 2-year-old son, Joseph, was rushed to the hospital. He had suffered a seizure and died. Weeks later, their 4-year-old daughter, Barbara, also collapsed and died. In the span of just 90 days, Marybeth Tenning had lost 3 children. The community was devastated for her. The doctors were baffled but sympathetic, attributing the deaths to a mysterious, undiagnosed genetic defect, or perhaps the terrifying and misunderstood phenomenon of sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. They did not see a killer, they saw the most unlucky woman in the world. But the graveyard kept growing. Over the next 13 years, the pattern repeated with terrifying precision. Marybeth would get pregnant, give birth, and within months she would rush the baby to the hospital, screaming that they had stopped breathing or had a seizure. Timothy died in 1973, Nathan in 1975, Mary and Jonathan in 1979 and 1980, Michael in 1981, Tammy Lynn in 1985. 9 children, 9 small coffins, 9 funerals where Marybeth stood dressed in black, receiving the condolences of a town that was slowly growing uneasy. The most damning piece of the puzzle, the one that should have ended her reign of terror years earlier, was the death of Michael. Michael was not her biological son, he was adopted. When he died in 1981 under the exact same mysterious circumstances as her biological children, the genetic defect theory should have evaporated instantly. You cannot catch a genetic disease from your adoptive parents. Yet incredibly, the autopsies were inconclusive. The doctors remained hesitant to accuse a grieving mother, and Marybeth was allowed to take another child, Tammy Lynn, home to her house of death. It wasn't until the death of Tammy Lynn in December 1985 that the spell finally broke. Tammy Lynn was found dead in her crib, and Marybeth claims she had simply found her that way. But this time, the police and the medical examiners drew a line in the sand. SIDS does not strike 9 times in one house. It does not strike adopted children. It does not strike toddlers. They launched a full-scale investigation, looking past the tears and the grieving mother act to see the cold reality underneath.
They brought Marybeth in for interrogation, separating her from the sympathy that had shielded her for over a decade. For hours she denied it, playing the victim, playing the martyr. But under the relentless pressure of investigators who laid out the timeline of death, the unlucky facade crumbled. Marybeth Tenning confessed. She admitted that she had smothered Tammy Lynn with a pillow because the baby wouldn't stop crying. She admitted to killing Timothy and Nathan. She described the chilling moments when she decided that her children's lives were less important than her need for quiet, or perhaps her need for the attention that came with the funerals. This is the terrifying psychological twist of the case. Many experts believe Marybeth suffered from a severe form of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, driven not by hatred for her children, but by an addiction to the sympathy she received when they died. She loved the funerals. She loved the pity. She loved being the center of the tragic narrative. She traded 9 lives for 14 years of condolences. This motive perhaps is the most disturbing of all. Is it possible that a human being can become so addicted to attention that they would sacrifice their own bloodline to get it? Or was she simply a cold-blooded psychopath using sympathy as a cover? Let me know your diagnosis in the comments. The trial was a sensation. The prosecution painted her as a serial killer of the worst kind, a woman who betrayed the most sacred trust in nature. They argued that she was fully aware of her actions, calculating enough to space out the murders to avoid suspicion, and manipulative enough to fool an entire medical community. The defense tried to argue that she was mentally ill, a victim of her own broken mind. But the jury saw the 9 coffins. They saw the pattern. They found her guilty of murder in the death of Tammy Lynn. She was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. While she was only convicted for 1 murder, the shadow of the other 8 hangs over her legacy. Marybeth Tenning spent decades in prison, maintaining a strange, quiet existence, a woman who wiped out an entire generation of her own family. She was eventually granted parole in 2018, a decision that sparked outrage, releasing the woman who had turned motherhood into a murder weapon back into society. She remains a living ghost, a reminder of a time when bad luck was allowed to mask unspeakable evil for too long. If this case file of a 14-year deception shocked you, hit the like button, share it, and make sure you subscribe for Part 10, the final and most shocking case of this Evil Mothers series.
Number 10. China Arnold. We have reached the end of our descent into the abyss, the final chapter in our investigation of the 10 most horrifying cases of maternal betrayal in history. We have seen mothers who killed for love, for money, for attention, and for freedom. But nothing can prepare you for a crime so singular, so scientifically cruel, and so utterly devoid of humanity that it stands alone in the annals of criminal history. This is the case that defines the word evil. If you have followed us through this dark journey, if you believe that these victims deserve to have their stories told so that justice is never forgotten, then subscribe to this channel right now. And if you appreciate the depth of this investigation, please hit the like button to support the channel as we conclude this harrowing series. Our final nightmare takes place in Dayton, Ohio, in August 2005. China Arnold was a 24-year-old mother living a volatile, chaotic life marked by alcohol and jagged relationships. She lived with her boyfriend, Terrell Talley, and her 4 children, including her innocent 28-day-old newborn daughter, Paris. Baby Paris was a healthy, vibrant infant, just beginning her life, unaware that she had been born into a war zone. The tension in the house was explosive, centered on a single, toxic question: who was Paris's biological father? China and Terrell argued constantly, with Terrell denying paternity and China insisting the child was his. On the night of August 29th, that argument reached a fever pitch. China and Terrell had gone out to a local park, where they drank heavily
and fought bitterly about the baby's lineage. When they returned home in the early hours of the morning, the fight didn't stop, it escalated. China was intoxicated and raged and consumed by a vindictive need to hurt the man she felt was rejecting her and her child. What happened next is a sequence of events so gruesome that seasoned homicide detectives and medical examiners were left traumatized. In a moment of drunken, incomprehensible fury, China Arnold decided to punish the baby for the argument. She did not reach for a gun, knife, or pillow. She walked into her kitchen. She picked up her 28-day-old daughter, Paris, and she placed the infant inside the microwave oven. She closed the door, and she turned it on. For a period estimated to be longer than 2 minutes, the microwave ran, subjecting the helpless infant to intense internal thermal radiation. The science of what happened inside that small box is horrific. Microwaves cook from the inside out, heating the water molecules in the body. Paris suffered instantaneous, catastrophic internal injuries, her vital organs literally cooking while her skin remained largely untouched, leaving no external marks of the torture she was enduring. China then took the baby out of the microwave. The child was dead or dying, but there were no burns on the outside, no blood, no bruises. She placed the lifeless infant back in her crib and waited. The next morning, she sounded the alarm. She and Terrell took the baby to the hospital, claiming she was unresponsive and cold. The doctors were baffled. Paris was dead, but there was no obvious cause. It wasn't SIDS, it wasn't suffocation, it wasn't a fall. It was a medical mystery. But when the coroner performed the autopsy, the truth revealed itself in a way that shocked the medical community. Paris's internal organs had been subjected to extreme heat, yet her external skin was unburned. There is only one device in a standard home that causes that specific type of trauma. The medical examiner ruled it a homicide by hyperthermia, specifically caused by a microwave oven. The investigation turned immediately to China Arnold. She denied it. She blamed the boyfriend. She blamed strangers. But the timeline didn't lie. She was the one who had been fighting about the baby. She was the one who had threatened to harm the child in the past. Prosecutors built a case based on the sheer impossibility of the injuries happening by accident. A baby cannot climb into a microwave. A baby cannot turn it on. This was a deliberate, manual act of execution. The motive was pure, vindictive spite. She wanted to destroy the very thing her boyfriend was rejecting, to remove the problem that was causing the fight. This level of cruelty raises a terrifying question about the nature of intoxication versus inherent evil. China was drunk, but does alcohol ever truly create a monster, or does it simply unleash the monster that is already there? Can being drunk ever be an excuse for an act this calculated? Let me know your verdict in the comments. The legal battle was long and complicated. China Arnold was tried 3 separate times. The first trial ended in a mistrial due to witness issues. The second trial resulted in a guilty verdict, but it was overturned on a technicality. Finally, in 2011, the third trial brought the saga to a close. The prosecution presented the medical evidence which was irrefutable. They painted China Arnold not as a struggling mother, but as a woman capable of unspeakable barbarity when her ego was bruised. The defense tried to argue that she was too intoxicated to form intent, or that someone else could have done it. But the jury looked at the science, they looked at the timeline, and they looked at the woman who could cook her own child to death. The jury found China Arnold guilty of aggravated murder. The death penalty was on the table, a punishment reserved for the worst of the worst. While she ultimately avoided execution, the judge ensured she would never walk free again. China Arnold was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She is currently incarcerated at the Dayton Correctional Institution, a living monument to the absolute nadir of maternal instinct. Her crime stands as the darkest entry in our series, a reminder that the domestic sphere, the kitchen, the home, can be the setting for horrors that rival any battlefield. This concludes our deep dive into the 10 most evil mothers in history. If this series opened your eyes to the dark complexities of the human mind, please hit the like button, share this video with fellow true crime fans, and make sure you are subscribed and have the bell turned on so you never miss our next investigation.